This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
All right, by request, I am taking some of the multi-part interviews that are very popular and putting them together as one interview. So some of the David Paulides ones, some of the Steph Young ones, the UFO history, which might be a bit of a project. I'm going to combine those where they were multiple parts into one part. This is not a new interview. I want to make that very clear. This is me talking to David about his Missing 411 Hunters book back in August of 2016. It's parts 1 and 2 combined into one. Here you go. And I'm talking tonight with David Paulides. So welcome back to the show, David.
Hey, thanks, Soraya. My pleasure.
And you have a brand new book out. You want to tell people what this one is focused on?
It's centered on hunters, armed hunters that go into the woods and don't come back. And we started tracking these maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and just over the number of cases, it just became overwhelming that there was parallels between the hunters and the hikers. And we thought we'd put it to print.
Okay. Why did you think that hunters were important enough to merit their own book?
Well, I think they're a unique subset of what we've put out there before. Namely, they're armed, and they can protect.
And they
can protect.
And they generally.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And they generally know the woods.
Exactly. A lot of these guys and ladies have gone to the same area for decades. And it's not like a casual person who goes out maybe for a one-time weekend hike into an area they've never been in. These guys really know the area, and to see that they've vanished makes no sense.
All right. For people who are not familiar with your work, what makes a missing person case a missing 411 case as opposed to just a missing person?
For starters, there's 59 geographical clusters of missing people in North America. And this evolved over the last 6 years of studying missing persons cases and reading thousands of them. And from that, there's certain criteria that kind of float to the top. And after you read hundreds of them and you see, okay, tracking dogs can't pick up a scent, or bloodhounds walk in a circle and lay down, or 5 teams of dogs come in and they can't find a scent from the location the person was last seen, or searchers find a body in an area that's been searched dozens and dozens of times, or a body is found in extremely close proximity to water. I mean, there's specific profile points that we lay out at the beginning of the book that I think after you read the book, you go, wow, those are really obvious. And it's hard to explain why a plane flying over a field, and a plane has forward-looking infrared radar in it, they fly over the field or the mountain and they don't see anything, they don't see a body emitting heat, and months later the body's found right where they flew over and they didn't see anything. And I think it's those type of things that after I just inundate you with so many, that it'll be obvious to the reader, okay, there's a point there to be made. Now, in some of the reviews in some of my previous books, people have made comments that, well, it's so repetitious, the stories kind of get boring. And I think the readers need to understand that if I gave you 2 or 3 stories where there were the same elements in it, people would say, oh, that's just a coincidence, or, you throw enough stories at it, there's bound to be a few that match. But if I threw dozens and dozens at you, and they all have the same basic profile to them, you start to think, oh, there's something here.
Yeah, and a lot of these people aren't found in this book.
Correct.
And, of course, many of them who are found in locations that were searched, which makes no sense. I mean, there's no way they were missed during the initial search attempts.
And that's exactly what I want to put out there is that this is an indictment on the search and rescue teams, because I think they do a superb job. They do cover these areas really well. And for some reason, I don't think the body or the person was there when they searched. And in previous books, I've stated that one instance, a small child was found laying on top of a tree, laying across a trail that search and rescue people took out every day out to their search zone. So it's almost as though the body was placed there to be found by the search teams going out. But this happens time after time after time. So.
And how far back do these cases go? You have some from the mid to late 1800s in here, correct?
Right. And in general, we've got one case from another book back to 1752, but in this book, late 1800s.
Yeah. So this is not something that just started. This is something that's been going on for centuries. And who knows how long before that we didn't have the appropriate records to find them.
Exactly. I think there is a historical significance to it. And even the cluster zones have that same historical aspect to it.
Now, when it comes to the cluster zones, are there any similarities between them?
Well, I think that's part of the uniqueness to it, is that many of them are national parks, and the biggest cluster in the world of missing people that fit the profile is Yosemite National Park. And then as you follow the Cascades further north, you can go right up through Oregon and Washington and find a series of national parks and forests that have these clusters in them, and it can't be refuted because there are these same missing persons cases there where people have never been found. And I think the commonality at the beginning was national forests, and we slowly started to disperse out and figure that, well, national forests have it, and even some rural areas have the same thing. And in Canada, there's national parks that fit this criteria as well. So national parks, forests, and rural areas are covered in this book.
And most of these disappearances happen in proximity to water.
Let me correct something. First of all, national parks are not in this book because you can't hunt in a national park.
All right.
That would be a jail time for you, so I corrected that. I'm sorry, go ahead with your question again.
Most of these disappearances seem to happen in proximity to water.
That seems to be the case, and in other books I've addressed that as well. And I don't know quite what to make of that.
What about type of rock that the ground is made of? I know boulder fields play a big factor in this, and granite. Do you see any other things come up regularly?
You know, you hit the biggest ones, but I was in Australia a couple months ago, and I gave a presentation in 3 cities there. And what I wanted to make them aware of was Yosemite, but then I showed them the locations where people have disappeared in Australia. And they are also in these locations with these giant boulder fields, giant pieces of granite. Several of the sites would remind you of Yosemite just because how large the granite is. And it's odd the way that comes up.
Well, it's interesting because in folklore, a lot of those areas are also where fairies and little people and things like that are supposed to dwell.
That's correct. I mean, I did a piece in one book about, I think it was Iceland, where they will actually make a road go around a giant boulder rather than move the boulder because they believe entities live inside.
And when you were in Australia, did you break up? Was it in Australia you broke a bone?
Yeah, I broke my fibula in my left leg.
How did that happen?
Well, we were filming a segment on a woman who disappeared, and we were way back in the forest area. It had rained the night before, so the rocks and things were really slick. I was carrying an expensive camera on my shoulder. I had a big backpack on, and I went over the top of one of these boulders on the trail and kind of slipped off the back side. My leg kind of twisted open, and I did everything I could not to drop this really expensive camera. And what I did is everyone there goes, "Uh-oh," because you could hear it crack.
Oh.
And the good thing was I didn't drop the camera. The bad thing was I broke my left leg. But being a hard-headed soul that I am, I stood there for a while and go, "Oh, this is bad." And I just cinched my boot up as hard as I could, and we walked out like another 2.5 miles.
Oh, man. Yeah, didn't it take you a day or so to get it looked at or something?
No, the truth is, we had another 9 days or so in Australia, and it just blew up like a huge melon. And I said, you know what? This is bad. If I go to the doctor, they're going to cast it or something, and it's just going to ruin the trip. I'll just gut it out, put my boot on as tight as I can, and keep going. And we did, and we finished segments, and we did the filming, and I ended up walking into a orthopedics office outside of Denver, and the physician goes, well, it can't be broken. It's got to be just torn ligaments and tendons. I said, really? He goes, oh, yeah, because you wouldn't be able to walk in on that. So they take an X-ray of it, and they walk into the back room with me, and they go, come here. And two doctors are standing there. They go, okay, we've had this practice for 20 years. Nobody has ever walked in with a broken fibula. You win the tough guy award. Oh, God.
Well, and that was, you were filming for the documentary?
No, we're actually filming if you go to Can-Am Missing on YouTube, we put up 3 segments that we filmed in Australia on missing people. They're free. Okay. You can watch them.
And what's going on with the documentary? I think it was about a year ago you came on talking about it initially.
Documentary's done. It's submitted to 2 film festivals. We're not saying which ones. But George Knapp talked about it on Coast to Coast. He gave us huge accolades. And I'd say we've let it be seen by just a handful of people, overwhelmingly positive feedback. And I do think that the people are going to be proud to see it. I think the guys did a good job.
When do you think the public might have access to it?
So the rules are in film festivals, they have to premiere at the film festival, otherwise they won't even review it.
Right.
So once we're approved and once it's seen there, then we'll release it to the public. But until then, we haven't even sent out any DVDs or things to our Kickstarter supporters because we can't.
Well,
so I'm guessing late this year, early next year.
Okay. Well, that's not too bad. And as long as you're happy with it.
I'm super happy with it.
Maybe it'll open some eyes.
Well, there's a lot of people who don't want to read a book, but I think that there's a lot more people who would sit and watch a movie. And I think this one will grab you because it involves missing kids, it involves the outdoors, and it involves the unknown. So I think it'll be appreciated by the people who for sure know the topic.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about one of the cases in the book. Why don't we start with Jerry Hayes? He was only 5 years old.
Yeah, Jerry. That's a really. It was actually first seen in one of my other books a couple of years ago. But what I've done is I've taken a handful of cases from those other books that match the Hunter cases, and I've put them in here. But this was an older one back in 1938, November 10th. He was in Rucker Canyon in the Chiricahua Mountains of Arizona. And what I need to tell people about this is that location was just 8 miles south of the Chiricahua National Monument. And there's been 3 people that have vanished there and never been found. Specifically, Paul Fugate, who was a National Park ranger, the only on-duty ranger ever to disappear and never be found. And in just the last year, 2 people have disappeared from that national monument and never been found. So this would qualify as part of that cluster, although this was just outside the monument itself. Rucker Canyon has an elevation of about 6,000 to 7,500 feet. His family set up a hunting camp at the lower elevations. And on November 10th, sometime during that day, the family and friends lost track of Jerry. He just sort of disappeared. And they searched, they found nothing, and they called the county sheriff. Well, within 10 days, they had more than 1,000 people in Arizona looking for this little guy. And they thought they had everything covered. And they were confused because the canyon they were in was almost a box canyon surrounded by high mountains, and it didn't seem as though there was really an area for him to escape to unless he went out the way that they came in, and that was covered. Well, the family knew that he couldn't go far because he was a really frail boy and he had rheumatism, and he never wandered far. Well, a week intensive search found nothing. And it was during that time that the military came in and they committed searchers. They stated that 150,000 acres had been searched. And the sheriff came out and publicly made a statement that he had no idea what happened to the boy. Well, now you fast forward 9 days, and November 19th, a group of searchers were off their normal grid, and they saw faint tracks going uphill on this mountain. And the tracks were small, and it didn't make any sense, and they knew they were all out of their area, and they weren't supposed to be in this area, but they decided, oh, what the heck, we're going to follow it. And they went 1,000 feet up a steep hillside. And they were 4.5 miles from the camp where Jerry disappeared. Well, they found Jerry deceased, laying on the ground with no shoes or socks. His coat was missing, even though the temps at night had gone into the 30s. And the coroner stated that Jerry died of exposure. Well, the question comes up is that the boy never wandered far. He was frail. He had rheumatism. Nobody believed he would leave his family. And nobody would believe that he would take his shoes and socks off and walk around in the bare mountains without some protection. That makes no sense. But I know that you know this, but the people who haven't heard me before, the absence of specific clothing or shoes and socks is another one of those elements that doesn't make any sense here. And lastly, he was found 1,000 feet up a hillside, and if you've wandered 4.5 miles, why would you just aimlessly go up a hillside? Doesn't make any sense either.
Especially when you have health problems that are going to limit how easily you could do something like that.
Correct.
I mean, the thing that stood out to me about this is that they could see the tracks where he went up. Why would a 5-year-old kid who has rheumatism, climb a freezing mountain?
Yeah, it doesn't comprehend to me unless, something was enticing him up there, something was prodding him up there. Who knows?
Or he was confused.
Yeah, it'd have to be really confused.
Yeah. I mean, like completely disoriented.
Right.
And even so, you wouldn't think he would be able to. From the sounds of the report, it seems like that climb was pretty rugged.
Well, and to me, when I read these reports, I always think, well, how do we even know that the searchers saw what they saw? Well, they might have seen some tracks going up there, and they followed the tracks up to where the body was, but how do we specifically know those were Jerry's tracks?
True. They may have just assumed that since they were looking for him.
Right. And they ended up there, so it had to be. But I don't take that kind of stuff for granted because there's too many times I've read reports and I've read news articles, and one article says A and the other article says Z, and they're completely polar opposite from one another. So in an old case like from 1938 where information is limited, I kind of, take it with a grain of salt.
But it still does fit the pattern pretty closely.
Yeah, it does.
And the thing is, when they don't find someone, I mean, that's weird, but it doesn't give us anything more to go on. When you find the body and the person doesn't have any obvious cause of death, that makes it even stranger.
Well, and I put this in many books, is that in this case, when they said that he died of exposure, I think a lot of times a coroner in a very small area may say something to quell the concerns of the community when in reality they may not even know. And in reading many, many, many cases like this, it's getting to be more apparent that and a lot of times they're getting more comfortable saying they don't know what caused the death. And I think looking back in time, you don't see that as often, but science has progressed, and the ability of a medical examiner to figure out cause of death has progressed a lot in 50 years. So really it should almost be just the opposite. But we're seeing more people come out and saying, we don't know what caused this death.
Yeah. One of the things that you note in the book is that a lot of these people are found face down. And that's not normal, is that correct?
Well, I think it's normal. In my world, it's not normal because When somebody gets tired, they tend to lay down. And when you
True.
lay down, you're never going to lay face down in the dirt. And when I think of somebody getting put down on the ground, I'm thinking about them being put either face down or laying on their back. And I have never, almost in all of these cases, heard of anybody being found on their back. They're always found face down. And there's a series of things that I think about in my mind that if I was the investigator on scene, what I'd be looking for, but it's never in any of the reports. I'd be looking for dirt in the mouth, dirt in the nose, etc. And there's never a mention of that, which makes me think that the person's dead before they hit the ground. And if they hit the ground that hard, there should be some sort of injuries to the face, nose, eye socket, etc. And you never hear about that either.
So it's more like they were just placed there carefully.
Well, that's kind of what it looks like. And those cases where a search area is gone over dozens of times and the person's not there, then all of a sudden they go back and the person's found there face down, it really is suspect.
Yeah. Because it seems like even if you fell forwards, if you were exhausted and you fell forwards, you would probably roll over on your back.
Or, just the common human element is if you're going to fall forward, you're going to put your hands out in front of you.
Yeah. And if it happened once, it would be one thing. But it's a common element in these cases when the person is found.
Yep, correct.
And, of course, the clothes being removed is a lot of people will throw that over to just being hypothermia, because it is known in some cases in hypothermia, people will start to feel really warm and start removing their clothes. But not all of these cases happen in the cold, where hypothermia would explain it. And the boots missing is almost it seems like it's 90 to 95% of the cases the boots are missing, whether they have other clothes on or not.
Correct. And what I tell people is I say, okay, start paying attention to Mount Everest, high mountain climbers. When they get hypothermia, do you ever hear about them stripping down naked? Ever? I've never heard that. I've never heard of a mountain climber being found without boots or socks. Ever. And there's a group of guides that have gone to Everest, and if you talk to them and you ask them if they ever heard of that, they've never even heard of that. So if that is a consistent element of hypothermia, then why shouldn't that transgress into high mountain climbing?
Yeah. All right. Let's look at. We'll leave some of the more stranger cases to last. Let's look at Bobby Boatman.
Well, Bobby's case happened in the Blue Mountains, kind of near a place called Godman Springs in Walla Walla. He was 14 years old, about 30 miles south of Dayton, Washington. Bobby was hunting with a group of older friends. He was last seen on a ridge on October 14th, 1951, hunting. And that first night that he didn't come back, there was a huge snowstorm that hit the area. And the weather was so extreme that the local ranger stated that it took out communications for that entire area and all the searchers that went in there. And it snowed so much it got up to their waist deep within just days. That's a big snowstorm. And what I talk about in the books is one of the things every hunter should do before they go out is check the weather. And that's like number one. Number two is you tell somebody where you're going exactly. And if you're not out by a certain date and time, that person calls authorities. Just a few things that you need to do. But there was a huge 7-day search, and they just scoured that mountainside. They found nothing. Well, 5 years after Bobby vanished, hunters in the Blue Mountains found a rifle and a red, knit cap, that same type he was wearing. And they were found near a place called Godman Springs. Well, they took the .30 caliber Remington rifle and the cap, and they turned it over to the sheriff, and the sheriff came down and took it to a guy that knew Bobby, that sold him the gun, or his parents the gun, and the cap that was found in the bush, and they were positively identified as being his. So the sheriff went back up into the area, and he found a scattering of human bones. And one article stated, quoting, "They were found under suspicious stirring circumstances." Well, the bones and things they were all ID'd as Bobby's, and the deputies at the scene at the time said Bobby had apparently been buried under a tree and then covered up with dirt. And this incident happened about 100 yards from where they found his rifle. Now, the sheriff stated he didn't know if foul play was happening or not, but that on October 17th, 1956, Bobby used a rope as his belt. And this was found on a sandbar in a box canyon, along with a sheath for his knife, and it was a long ways from the ridge that he was last seen on, and a long ways from where his body was found. Now, the people who found the rifle and the cap indicated it appeared, and I quote, that they were dropped as he was running. Now, bears and mountain lion would not take a knife and a sheath, a mile away and put it on a sandbar. And if there was human involvement, why wouldn't they take his rifle or his cap? And why would anyone take the time, to bury Bobby under a tree and not hide the rifle? Now, burying somebody under a tree, I don't think people understand how difficult this is, especially a big tree. Trying to maneuver around roots and then digging down in hard soil, this is a monumental task. If a human was involved in burying the body, then why not dispose of the evidence around it, most predominantly the rifle and the cap?
Right.
Now, this case is very similar to another one in this book, one Donald McDonald case on 12/15/49, 17 years old at the time, never found. Very similar circumstances, kind of the same area. This is one of those cases where very strange.
Normally, I would think if you buried someone under a tree, chances are you're never going to find them.
Oh, I would say so. Probably the only way to find them would be, 50, 60 years later when the tree falls over. That might be some remnants of bones, but maybe not.
Yeah, and when you look at a case like this, none of this makes any sense, because being buried under a tree implies that someone or something else was there.
Oh, yeah.
And if they were, as you said, why would they leave this stuff? I mean, an animal, okay, maybe, but who took and put stuff on? In any case, who would take that stuff and put it on a sandbar?
Correct.
I mean, that's just bizarre. Unless you're intentionally trying to throw people off and not have them put pieces together, but who's going to do that and why?
Well, then you think about the bizarre coincidence of somebody even finding a sheath for a knife on a sandbar and turning it in.
Yeah.
I mean, if I found something like that, I don't even think I'd give it a second thought. I would just leave it there and keep going.
Right. Or someone might be like, "Oh, cool, I got a new knife sheath."
Yeah. No, it's very odd that these were all found and they were turned in and they were able to put the pieces together and make a very unusual story out of it. But I don't think anybody was able to adequately explain it away.
And it completely rules out an animal killing him and then burying him under a tree. I mean, are there any animals that would even do something similar?
I don't know of any. And even if there was an animal that killed him, then you would think that predation on that location would have been seen, or remember there was up to half a body width of snow during the search. You'd think that they would have seen it.
Right.
Because the rifle would have sunk down in the snow, and you might not have seen that. But if he was dead, there would have been blood everywhere. It would have been a scene that you could have observed from yards and yards away.
Now, one of the things you point out here is the incidence of bad weather surrounding a lot of these disappearances. Now, some of that could just be due to time of year or elevations, couldn't it?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. And all of these things could have a very mundane explanation. But when, again, you look at dozens and dozens of them and the same thing keeps happening every time, you start to think, you know what? How many times could coincidence strike like that?
Yeah. And you got to wonder if there is something doing this, are they watching the weather? Or is the weather a side effect of something else? Because some of these storms come up very suddenly, don't they?
That's true. And as in this case that we just talked about, but you got to remember, and I'm acutely made aware of this by people listening to your show and others that hear me, and they say, you guys keep forgetting that the U.S. can manipulate weather. I mean, we've been manipulating weather for decades. Cloud seeding. There's a lot of rumors out there that we have more advanced measures to manipulate weather.
Sure, sure.
So, I mean, if we can do it, as dumb as we are as humans, who really knows what can, right?
Sure, sure. And that leaves a very big door open.
Absolutely.
Because there's the things we can think of, and then there's the things that may be out there that we've never even imagined.
Well, this is the part where people will turn off the radio and say, "Oh, these guys are just talking about wacky stuff." Hey, unless you have an open mind in all of this kind of research, then you're gonna be hitting your head against a brick wall day in and day out. But just like you said, it's pretty apparent that weather is involved in these cases, and it comes up more times than not.
It's also apparent that these cases don't make sense, and it's something, like you said, that a lot of the cases seem like carbon copies of one another, and that's one of the ways they're carbon copies of one another. You look at the end scene when someone is found, and it's like this. None of this makes any sense to what we would think would happen to someone when they go missing, which is, they get lost and maybe get hurt and fall, or an animal attacks them, or a person attacks them, and none of that fits these cases. Instead, you find people who have no obvious cause of death in many cases. When they can even have enough of a body to tell, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of animal attacks or anything like that. Plus, you have the weird clothes and item scattering.
I get a lot of people that say, well, why hasn't this been put together years ago? Why, if it was so easy to do, and I'm not saying it was easy to do, then why wasn't this discovered, decades ago? And I got to remind people that when search and rescuers go out and find somebody, 90 to 95% of those people are volunteers. They're razor focused at finding the person, hopefully alive. And once they find that person, they're going home. And if it's a bad weather, like in Bobby's case, they're going home to a nice warm fire, and hopefully they found the little boy and he's okay. But the last thing they're going to do is hang around and talk like we're talking right now. And the truth is that most search and rescue is done intimately in a valley or a city or a county or a city. And those counties or cities don't look at the big picture like we're looking at it here. I mean, I've documented, I think, 9 countries now where this is happening, and I've probably read 6,000 or 7,000 case files to glean it down to these, several hundred that match. And search and rescue people don't have the time to do that. They've got other professions and things, and there's nobody looking at it from 10,000 feet. They're only looking at it from ground level.
And the other thing you note repeatedly is that if someone is presumed dead, they're no longer on the list of the missing.
Boy, that is something that really, really bothers me. And as an example, there's somebody who dies in the woods, and let's say they're not found, and the wife has to get their benefits from Social Security. They need a death notification certification from the courts in order to activate the benefits. Say you own a house with somebody, you can't even sell the house because the person is technically still alive. So they go to court and they get a notification of death. Well, and the courts say he's dead. Well, that's exactly what the National Park Service and the National Forest Service wants, because no longer is the person missing. He's wiped off every roll everywhere. And the only way you can find that is delving into archives on a specific name search to find that person. And then you figure out, my God, the person went missing in the same area where 4 other people went missing, but they're not listed on anybody's rolls anywhere as a missing person. How is that? And then I found out from the Park Service that there's a criteria called missing presumed dead. Well, they're presumed dead and they're no longer missing, so it's not an active case file. Yet, damn, they're still missing.
And also these clusters, they're not like they don't happen all in 1958. These are spread out over a lot of times a century at this point.
And again, I explain this out and I say, well, if 5 people went missing in 2 years in a small city or a small rural area, that entire community would be in an uproar.
Yep.
What's happening? What's going on? We need somebody to look into this. But I spread those identical 5 cases out over, say, 40 years. Well, now you've gone through 2 or 3 rounds of different police officers and sheriffs don't remember what happened 30 years ago, let alone 40 years ago. Yet it's cookie cutters of the same incident happening, but they're spread out over times, so there's no flashing yellow light that anyone's looking at.
Right. So, I mean, you're probably the first person to ever correlate this on such a massive scale.
Yeah, I don't know anybody else that's ever been so ignorant to do it.
And how much time do you devote to a case? I mean, obviously some of the old ones you can only get so much information, but like on average, how much time do you think you devote to each case once you find a case that fits the criteria?
You know, that's hard to say because a lot of the newer cases, I'll call up the sheriff or RCMP or whoever, and I'll talk to them and I'll see what I can get out of them. Or I'll do an FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and try to get it from a group of individuals in the government. And it really just depends. There's a case right now I'm looking at a national park where I cannot believe I missed it and nobody else has ever heard of it. And it involves a small person who disappeared there decades ago. And it is an absolute whodunit. She was never found. Nobody ever wants to talk about it. The Park Service won't give up the case file. It's one of those classic cases you go, this is why the National Park doesn't want to give us a list of missing people. Because I think if we really knew how many people went missing, it would make us stand up and take note.
Have you had anyone, any families that have of people who have gone missing contact you?
Yes, I have. And those are some of the hardest days I've ever spent in my life. Because these people are great people. And they've lost a loved one, and they look to the one group that they know will help them. And in one instance, it was the National Park Service. And their last name was the Stellings. And the Stellings lost their dad at Mesa Verde National Park, and he just disappeared. Well, we sent a crew of ours and myself went down there because it's hard to believe what the Stellings said happened and how they were being treated by the Park Service. I mean, this was near the kind of the midsection of us making the movie, and we got to see this. We got the permits, we went down there, and I think Mr. Stelling had been gone maybe a year and a half by that point, so his wife and the son went in and they wanted to talk to the superintendent. And Soraya, the superintendent, would not even come out and talk to those people. They wouldn't.
Wow.
They wouldn't come out and talk to us. They wouldn't send a manager of the search to come and talk to us. The people, the family, were treated like second-class citizens at best. They gave us a person, a National Park Ranger, to talk to about other issues. He was ordered not to talk about the search for Stelling. And we kind of took him off the record and said, come on, what's going on here? And he goes, if I talk about it, I'll get fired. And he goes, I got specific orders. I said, I've never seen a superintendent or anybody in management in any government agency treat somebody so rude. He just put his head down and he looked at the ground. He goes, I don't know what to say. I'm embarrassed.
Wow. Do you think it's like an intentional cover-up, or they just don't want bad publicity?
So years ago, I talked to Mr. Martin, the father of Dennis Martin, and
Right.
he told me that he didn't think the superintendents had any real responsible decision-making at all. And he said, I can only talk about Dennis's case, Dave, and he said, I don't think they made it one decision. Every time he had to do anything, he had to call somebody, and he got a dictate on how to handle it. I've got a feeling that that's probably the way it is everywhere. And it may be because they're all looking out for their own backs and they don't want to take the responsibility of making a decision, or maybe on these really big cases, they've got a dictate. You just follow whatever we're saying at headquarters. Whoever's calling the shots, who knows? I can tell you that I didn't believe that a family who lost a loved one would be treated that way. I never said that to him, but then after I saw it, my God, I could have cried with him, because you expect these people to bend over and help you in every way possible to find your loved one. These people wouldn't even talk to her.
And what do they have to lose by talking to them? That's the thing.
I wish I knew.
Now, you had started a petition against the Park Service at one point. Did you get anywhere with that?
A petition is still out there. If you go to canammissing.com on our website, look under the petition site, there was a professor out here in Denver that read my books, and she understood exactly what I was saying, and that is that there needs to be a public database that's searchable for the entire Department of the Interior missing people on public lands. And she wrote it up, did an excellent job. I think we have about 6,600 signatures on it right now. We're aiming for 10,000, and then we'll go to a senator and we'll ask for either congressional or Senate hearings about why they can't do this.
All right. Let's look at the case of Larry Wyckoff.
Well, Larry was only 15 years old. This happened in a small area of Sharon, Michigan, up on northern area. November 25th, 1977. He was a sophomore at Tower High School in a city called Warren. And his dad was an engineer for the U.S. Army in Warren. And I know people they seem to like to hear when parents are working for the Army when a kid goes missing for some reason. So I make that public. And the location was on the southeast side of the Manistee River near Sharon, Michigan. Well, on November 25th, Larry was camping in a trailer off Sharon Road, and you can look this up on a map, Sharon, right near Warren, right near the river with a group of friends, and they were hunting. Well, on November 25th, all of them left their trailer, and they hiked 2 miles east. Well, one of the friends wounded a buck, and the hunters tracked it for a long time. Eventually, they wanted to give up. But Larry said, no, we wounded it good. I'm going to keep tracking it for a while. I think I can find it. Well, at that point, all the hunters returned to their trailer for lunch except Larry. Well, a couple hours after lunch, he doesn't show up, so they start searching for him, and they couldn't locate him. And they decided at 3 o'clock to call the sheriff. Well, Larry was dressed warmly, snowmobile boots, coat, cap, gloves, carrying a rifle. And deputies got on scene and they started searching right away. They had a tracking dog on scene the first hour he was reported missing. Didn't find a scent, couldn't track. On November 26th, the following day, a light snow started to fall. They had already requested a Coast Guard helicopter to fly into the scene and help. Well, they grounded that because of the weather. But they had 125 searchers on the ground. Fast forward to December 4th, the Michigan State Police sent their best tracking dogs to the location, and they couldn't find anything. So 10 days of searching, they found nothing. And the effort to locate Larry was terminated. Now, you fast forward about 6 months to May of 1978. And the sheriff's office decides to do something unique, and they make a public call out to psychics to help them find Larry. Well, one of the psychics drew a map of what they saw from the sky looking down. And the deputy took that sketch, because he didn't recognize it, to several local residents to see if anyone could recognize this area of high grass, a beaver pond, and a creek that was in this drawing. Well, they went to a guy who was an old-time trapper in the area, and he trapped the area for 60 years. And he said right away, he goes, I know where this is. And he said it's a 1.5 miles about from where Larry was last seen in a location called the South Swamp. Swamps come up a lot in these stories, by the way. Well, again, the initial effort to go out and find him in this area failed, so they get a hold of the trapper again, and he went out with them, and they found the body right away. And it was in an area that had been searched by searchers many times. So the question comes back, he's only 1.5 miles from where he was last seen, and 90% of people in this scenario would be found in 2 miles or less. And 12 canines failed, helicopters failed, 2 airplanes failed, and hundreds of professional searchers who combed that area failed. Cause of death was listed as exposure. And in this instance, again, found near water, he had plenty of clothing to survive. So how he died of exposure doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And one thing I put in the book in the back is a list of safety items that every hunter should be aware of. And one thing is that the international distress call for a hunter is 3 shots in succession. Boom, boom, boom. Wait 20, 30 minutes, do it again. And then eventually your friends know you're in trouble and they start honing in on that. Now Larry never did that, and he probably didn't even know to do it. And in fact, I'm guessing probably a majority of hunters don't even know to do it. And when you read about a lot of these cases, a lot of hunters aren't even carrying more than a couple rounds of ammunition. Well, you should be carrying at least 20 rounds just to help you in these cases like this. So, Larry, I don't know what to say about that. It's pretty interesting that a psychic was able to write exactly where he was at.
Yeah, and it was someplace he wasn't prior.
No.
Have many of these cases involved psychics? I don't remember you writing too much about psychics being involved in many of these.
You know, in the hundreds and hundreds of cases, there's only a small handful where a psychic was able to be useful like this.
That doesn't surprise me necessarily. I think that type of thing is very hit and miss.
Well, you know what I tell people when they ask me, they said, well, have you ever used a psychic? And I always say, for sure, I'm open to it. But has anyone ever met a psychic who ever admitted that they weren't maybe really bad? All of them think they're really good.
They all think they're 100%.
And what I tell people is that psychic doesn't need me. Buy a book, go find one person in that book, and you've got me sold. But they always say, well, have you ever gone out? Well, psychic can go do this on their own. Or if they know where the body's at, tell me. I'll go do it. But you don't hear that.
Yeah.
And I've never had a psychic tell me they know where a body's at.
Oh, this guy obviously was pretty close.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, those hits do happen. There are some psychics with pretty good records with the police. It's just not overly common.
No, and again, I'm not somebody that's going to discount every one. I'm open to it, and especially the ones that have shown success that don't ask for compensation. A while ago, this is a kind of a funny story. A while ago, a fairly famous radio broadcaster told me that they wanted to introduce me to this group of remote viewers, and they thought that they could find a couple bodies for me. And I said, oh, that's outstanding. And I said, now tell them that they're going to be vetted real good, because I'm not going to put them in the proximity of the victims' families just to be disappointed or worked or used. Oh, no, they would never do that. So when I'm on the phone with this organization, they said, oh, yeah, great, we want to help, and then they lay a dollar figure down about how much money they need to do this.
Yeah.
I was pretty upset.
And that's just for them to try. That's not how much they want if they're successful.
No, it's just to try.
Well, I mean, if they said, hey, we want this much money if we can find the body, I think that's one thing.
Sir, I think there's some things in life that you don't charge for. And if somebody's missing a child or a loved one, and you want to get paid for finding the person because you have some special abilities, and I think morality should rule out, and sometimes you got to just do the good things in life and do them the right way. And I think this is one of those instances where, hey, you do all you can to help these people. I know I would.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with that. It's just, like when you want to be paid up front for something you can't even necessarily promise you can do. I mean, you can promise it, but you can't prove you can do it.
Right. That's exactly the scenario.
It's like someone saying, well, I can probably fix your roof. Give me this money and we'll see what happens.
Right. And if it leaks, we're not fixing it.
Yeah, exactly. Except obviously now we're dealing with people's emotions and their families. Time of disappearance. A lot of it seems to happen in the evening, doesn't it?
Late afternoon, early evening. That's what I tell everyone.
And it's interesting because that's like the liminal period of the day. It's the changeover from day to night.
That's right.
And a lot of paranormal stuff seems to happen around liminality. So, I mean, not that this is necessarily paranormal. We don't know what it is. But if there's a paranormal connection, I'm wondering how much that plays a part.
Oh, that's been brought up many, many times. And, I think when it became pretty obvious that hour was going to stand out, I think almost everybody who had an open mind kept going to that point.
Yeah. Okay. People can get this book only on your website, correct?
Yes. Please don't go to Amazon. I think they're charging like $125 for it right now. Go to Can-Am,
Wow.
Canadian American CanAmMissing.com, and it's $25.
Okay, and that goes for all of your books. None of them are actually on Amazon.
We don't put anything on Amazon.
Why did you decide not to?
Well, I mean, I had a pretty decent IT background, and I knew I could get some pretty good visibility on the net through Google search, Yahoo search, and if you just type in Missing 411 on Yahoo or Google, we're the #1 hit. So, why pay an exorbitant fee to Amazon when we have our own website?
True. But I think a lot of people just go to Amazon by default. Doesn't matter what it is, they're just going to go to Amazon.
And then if you look at the description of the book on Amazon, on almost every description, our website is the very first thing you see.
Nice. And occasionally I'll hear people complain, oh, these books are way too expensive. It's like, no, they're $25. Go to the website. Stop going to Amazon.
Yeah, exactly.
And you do offer them as a full set.
Yeah, there's a box set that we sell with sleeve, and it's a nice collector's edition. We've had that for the last 2 weeks now.
Okay. And that's how many Missing 411 books are there now?
6.
6. Okay. And you have a map as well?
Yeah, there's a cluster map of North America that we put out. This is the second version, so it's been updated. 59 clusters are on there. You can read every name on the map.
Nice, yeah, because the map on the back, I mean, you can get the idea, but obviously there's too many flags on there to be able to make anything out clearly, but it does give you an idea of where the clusters are.
Exactly.
How big is the map?
Oh, it's wall size. I think it's 36 by 25.
Nice. Yeah, I guess that would make it easier to read.
Yeah.
Are there any plans to make any of these digital?
No, and I get asked that. There's 8 different types of ebooks out there, and if I do one, then I've got to do all of them, and it's just a distraction, honestly. I mean, writing a book is a big deal, and I could barely get that done. And then to focus on digital versions. It's just more time away from me not working on understanding these cases.
And your new book is on hunters, your new Missing 411 book. And one of the things you start this book with is a quote from H.P. Lovecraft. Actually, probably my favorite quote from H.P. Lovecraft. And it goes like this: the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday, in piecing together of disassociated knowledge, will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. So why did you pick that?
Yes, someone gave that to me maybe a couple of years ago, and it's actually on the wall in the office here. And I think it just tells you that you should keep an open mind. And there's a lot more to the world that we don't understand. And even if you just watch Ancient Aliens or you watch the Science Channel and how electrons respond when people are watching versus when they're not watching them. And there's so many things we've learned just in the last 10 years that if we continue to keep a closed mind, we're not going to learn more, and science isn't going to advance. And I think that to walk around and say we know it all and this is all just normal and don't worry about it, I really think that's a fool's mentality.
And I would agree. And I think, too, looking at the cases that you cover, there is a little bit of that cosmic... Lovecraft was famous for creating cosmic horror. And these cases have a touch of that. I mean, there's something that, you look at them and you just say, I don't understand what I'm looking at.
True. Now, live that every day for 6 years and what that would do to your mentality.
Yes, well, I actually think about these cases a lot. Like anytime I come across something new, I mean, one of the first things that pop into my mind are these missing people's cases, because they are so, I don't know, they're so bizarre, and it seems like we're just missing something. And so every time I come up with some new idea, come across some new idea, I go, could it apply to this?
Well, I said this on Coast to Coast a few weeks ago, is every day, I get an email from somebody who's listened to a couple of your shows, a couple of Coast to Coast shows, and says, hey, I didn't mean to be offensive, but I think I know what's going on here. And Saurav, this is the God's truth. I have never gotten an email from anybody who has read the 6 books, understands the entire circumstances that I've laid out, and says, I know what caused this. I've never had one from anyone who's read them all. It's always the people who only listen to a few interviews that think they know. But the circumstances, just like you explained, are so befuddling that when you look at the facts, there isn't an easy answer to them.
No, not even slightly. And you can easily look at one case and go, well, maybe this happened. And then you can look at the next case and go, well, maybe this happened. But when you start seeing it over and over, it's clear that these aren't, the same thing is happening in these cases, at least 90% of them. So there is no one thing that covers them all. This is where the problem comes in. Individually, they're weird, but they don't stand out like they do when you put them all together.
Correct.
One of the weird things I noticed, and it happened, I think, more in the beginning of the book than later on, but the date September 11th kept popping up.
Yeah, there's a few anomalies that will come up to you that seem odd, but I really don't know if there is any date significance. I mean, if you look at this book, there's an overload in October, November, December, but that's hunting season, so that's when
right.
the hunters are going to be out there. but I don't know. I won't say no, but and again, hunting seasons, a lot of seasons start around the same date too, so that's when the most people would be out in the forest.
Sure.
So that could be another reason. I really don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know if there was any significance to it. It just kept standing out to me for some reason. I'm going, oh, look, September 11th again.
Yeah, and I do think that in some jurisdictions that's a common date that the season starts.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at some of these, some of the slightly more unusual cases in the book. A lot of them, I mean, they're all unusual in their own right, but you have a few of them here that really kind of stood out to me as something weird. And the first one we can look at is Robert Springfield.
Well, Robert was a Native American, and he was hunting on the Crow Indian Reservation, kind of located in the southeast section of Montana, Bighorn Mountains. This incident happened in September 19th, 2004. He's 49 years old. And this area is known for big game, big mountains. Well, he was with his son Colton, age 13, and his adopted son Brent. And they went into an area called Black Canyon for elk hunting. And Robert was a bow hunter, and he was armed. And he couldn't move real good because he had a disability from work. So he was going to stand in one area of the canyon as the kids kind of herded the elk down towards him. Well, as this was going on, and they got later in the afternoon, the kids started to arrive back at a prearranged spot, and Robert didn't come back. And again, this is an area of the reservation where you have to have special privileges to go into, and the public obviously would never go in there. But when he disappeared, the tribal police took over along with the Bighorn County Sheriff. And right away, they got a helicopter with FLIR making low-flying reconnaissance missions over the area, saw nothing. And the search and rescue went on for days, and then his family and friends took it over for more days. Nobody ever found anything. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the sheriff also brought in canines and equestrians, found nothing. In October 2005, about 13 months after the incident happened, the disappearance, a hunter was in that Black Canyon area, and say 150 feet away, he hears a crow screeching its head off, just like bellowing. And it was incessant. And so the hunter started to walk towards the tree where this bird was at, and it never stopped, just screaming and yelling. And he walked to the bottom of the tree, and he saw human remains. Well, the hunter led authorities to the tree, where they found a partial skull, a femur, and a neatly rolled up men's belt next to the skull. 2 boots sat neatly stacked right next to the skull and the femur, and there was a man's coat on the ground with a small tear in the back, and a wallet was found with money in it, indicating it was Robert's. The only items missing from the scene were his bow and arrows. Well, the sheriff, in his infinite wisdom, decided this is very suspicious, and he called the FBI out to work the scene. So, because this is federal land, because it's an Indian reservation, the FBI has primary authority. Well, they came and they worked it, and they sent the remains to the ID section at Quantico, Virginia. Well, his wife, in the months following, was giving conflicting information as to the cause of death. She was first told he was shot. Then she was later told he was killed by a falling tree. Well, the scene where he was found was just above where this master search and rescue operations center was at. It was close to it. And so there's no way she didn't believe that the body parts were there during the search, because she believed they would have found them. And it says this in all the reports. Now, 2 years after the FBI took custody of the body parts, they still had them, which is weird. And they stated that they were categorizing him in DNA for input into their system. Well, finally, on March 3rd, 2009, almost 5 years after, or 4 years after they found his body, the family had to file a federal lawsuit to get the body parts back. And the lawsuit stated that Robert died under suspicious circumstances and the FBI failed to investigate the incident. Now, they eventually did get the body parts back, but the oddities behind this, you got to think about this clearly. The screeching crow is almost like a beacon. Hey, come here, there's something here.
Yeah.
If someone came across the body and the remains and stole the bow, why not steal the money in the wallet?
Yeah.
And then why would the FBI keep the remains for 2 years and force the family to go to litigation to get it back? To me, that's unbelievable. And then
it seems like more trouble than it would have been worth for them.
Yeah. Or what was there that there must have been something big that they were still looking for in those remains that they couldn't figure out, and they were willing to go to litigation to just give them the time to figure it out.
And it was just a couple of bones, wasn't it?
And a partial skull. But I think the big thing is that when they say he was shot versus a tree fell on him, there's a big difference there.
Right. And no real evidence to back up either one.
No. And then who rolled up the belt, and why would you ever roll up a belt?
Yeah.
And
but this is not the first case you've had where the belt has been rolled up.
Well, this is the first case kind of like this where an FBI evidence response team came in, took control of the situation, and then kind of took off with everything. This happened on a case in Cramp Lakes National Park in a guy named Charles McCullough, where a ranger, some people found a body 12 miles into the wilderness. Well, McCullough disappeared in the middle of winter right at the side of the lake, and they didn't find him for a couple of years. People 12 miles in find this scene with a skull and these little chips of bone, and I actually got to interview the ranger that found the scene, and he said, "Dave, strangest scene I've ever seen in my life." And I knew, my partner and I looked at it and said, something isn't right here. And they backed their way out. They called for an FBI evidence response team from Portland, and they came down to Crater Lake, and they worked that scene. And that tells you how suspicious some of these really are. And the suspicious thing to Marion, the ranger, he goes, "Dave, we talked about it for years. How did this 19-year-old kid in the middle of winter, when there's 12 to 20-foot snowdrifts everywhere, how did he get from Lakeside 12 miles into the wilderness to where we eventually found his body?" I go, "What do you think, Marion?" He goes, "There is no good explanation for that. He didn't have cross-country skis. He didn't have snowshoes. We don't know."
The crow definitely stands out in this story as well.
Now, how odd is that?
Yeah. For some reason, it's not as surprising realizing he's Native American.
Right.
But it almost seems like something you'd get in a fictional movie that involved a Native American dying and a crow signaling someone to his body.
Yeah, you're right. It would be a good movie plot line.
But yeah, the belt rolled up implies that someone else was there at some point.
Yeah, and I rolled that around in my mind that maybe another hunter had seen the location, and maybe he was poaching, so he couldn't really admit he was there, and he just got fascinated with it. But again, it goes back to, even if another human did it, why wouldn't they take the money?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm not saying that makes sense. I'm just saying that, the belt rolled up as an intentional act. It's not like the belt fell off his corpse and rolled itself up.
Oh, exactly.
And the fact that the boots were laying right next to the skull as well, it's almost like a prepared scene.
Yep. And that's the way it read in the reports when you get into the minutia.
And again, I'm sure, especially from the way I just phrased that, people might be thinking, well, it's some kind of satanic cult.
Yeah.
But that's a long time period and a lot of satanic cults killing all these people in these weird ways, and only on rare occasions leaving things in a specific pattern.
No, and in these reports, none of the investigators even made mention of anything satanic related to it.
It's just one of those go-tos for some people.
Oh, yeah.
Same with cattle mutilation. You see the same thing. Oh, well, it's a satanic cult, despite the fact there's never been evidence of that in all the years that people have been researching cattle mutilations.
That's right.
Now, his bow and such were missing. That's the only thing that was gone, right?
That's right.
What is it? What do you find different in the cases about bow hunters versus gun hunters?
You know, to me, it seems as though bow hunters are rarely found. And, you know, to be a good bow hunter, you have to be stealthy. You have to kind of blend into the wilderness. So I'm not sure what to make of that, but I know that most bow hunters also carry a firearm, a pistol with them. And I know in a lot of the cases I've written about, the bow hunters did have a pistol with them. And there's a case out of New Mexico where a guy named Mel Nadell disappeared. And he had a disability, he had a bad knee, he carried I think a .44 Magnum pistol when he went out bow hunting. Told his friends he was just going to go 100 yards down the trail to bow hunt, no further. Disappeared. This was years ago, 5 or 6, maybe even more. And they never found anything of his. That doesn't make sense.
You do have a case that we're not going to talk about in the book at the very end, involving a bow hunter. That's very strange. But people can pick up the book and check that one out.
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever written that kind of story, and it's gotten a lot of interest. But the sources were just impeccably credible, so that's the reason it's in there.
Yeah, and it's not a missing persons case.
Nope, something a hunter saw that is baffling.
Yes. Do you find any, and I guess with hunters, they're generally wearing the same type of thing, but in the collection of all these cases, do you see anything like bright colors sticking out more when people disappear, or camouflaged people disappearing more?
You know, at the beginning, it seemed as though people disappeared wearing bright colors. And, you know, there's a lot of camo clothing out there right now that is orange and black.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, of course, the greens and the grays. And in most of these reports, it doesn't say exactly what the hunter was wearing when they disappeared, surprisingly.
Mm. I know there is a legend, and I believe it's from Malaysia, and I don't know if you covered it or not.
I did.
Okay, where they told them not to wear bright colors into the woods?
Yep, and I even talked about the part in Malaysia where it's happening, too.
Yeah. So, that's interesting. I don't know if it's connected to what's happening here.
Well, people were disappearing in the woods.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing, people almost never, there might be like one or two cases in your books where a couple of people have disappeared at once. It's almost always when someone is alone.
And it's strange because it seems as though a lot of people have said it seems as though that they're almost stalked and they wait for the point of something to happen. Now, to me, when I was reading about the hunters and I was starting to prepare the book, there were a lot of cases where one hunter would tell another, I don't feel good, I'm going to go back. And it was at that point of separation that the other one disappeared.
Yeah.
And I've stated before in other books that there's a lot of times where people say they're not feeling good before they disappear. And is that some kind of targeted response? Is that some way to separate us? I don't know.
Well, let's look at James McCormick.
That's a tough one. And when I wrote about this case, I had a couple tears in my eyes, I got to say, because I felt real compassion for the dad. Happened 12/5 of 1961, Larch Mountain, Multnomah Falls in Oregon, right on the Columbia River. Absolutely beautiful falls. James McCormick was 16 years old. He was with his dad, also named James. The falls are about 30 miles east of downtown Portland, right on the Columbia River. Absolutely, you could look at them online. They're gorgeous. Well, James and his son were going hunting, and they were going to go for bobcat up on top of Larch Mountain on the backside of the falls. Well, James Sr. was a firefighter for the city of Portland, and he was in good shape, very experienced hunter. The first day they went hunting, the weather almost immediately turned bad. It first got cold, and then it started to rain, which was soon followed by snow. Well, they took their dog with them, and the three of them were temporarily lost and spent the night on the mountain, kind of huddling together to keep warm. As morning came about, James Sr. ended up carrying his 215-pound son for 3 hours until he was exhausted and had to put him down. So the boy wasn't feeling well, was cold, and he put him down and he told his son, "Hey, stay right here. I saw some headlights up here in the woods. I'm going to go see what it is, and I'll come right back." Now, all you have to do is look at a map on the backside of Multnomah Falls. There is nothing back there for miles and miles. Well, his dad left. He came back just a few minutes later, and the boy was gone. He first searched for an hour, and he couldn't find his son, and he immediately headed to the bottom of the mountain and eventually stumbled into the Falls Lodge and requested assistance. Within hours, 200 off-duty Portland firefighters responded along with a search and rescue team. The sheriff responded with planes, canines, and a search and rescue mountain team. Well, the searchers went back into the area where the dad took him, and they immediately found the boy's boots and socks. Now, stop right there. This makes no sense. Yet it's something that we've talked about earlier, that in these cases, the boots and the socks are found many times. And the boy's glasses were found somewhat near where the dad last saw him. So now you've got a kid who really can't walk far and a kid who can't see. Well, later in the day, the search teams found the boy 300 yards down from where he was last seen, at the bottom of a small cliff, dead. Some of the articles implied that the boy died from a fall, and others stated he died from exposure, and there was never a definitive statement. Now, in past books, I've explained of many instances where people disappear with a canine, as these two were. Loss of clothing, loss of boots. The boy doesn't feel well just prior to the disappearance. There's separation between the two people. He becomes vulnerable. Important point here. About 6 months ago, I was watching a segment of Northwoods Law. And it's a show about Maine's Warden Service. And this story was about an older man that was doing maintenance on the Appalachian Trail in Maine. And he didn't come home. And so 3 wardens went out with a film crew on the trail, and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. And they're stopped on the trail, and they're looking up the trail, and they see a light in the trees. It's kind of moving around. And they even said on the show, "Wow, that's kind of unusual, but maybe that's the flashlight of the guy." Now, they don't call out to the guy, which you would think they'd do, because it looks on screen maybe it's 150 feet away. They walk up that trail, and there's nothing there. The light disappears, and the man was found the next day. Apparently, he got home at 11 o'clock that night. He came off the mountain. He was fine. But to me, when I saw that show, I said, "Oh my God, maybe that is what James McCormick Sr. saw when he was on Larch Mountain."
Well, I mean, the whole will-o-wisp legend of lights leading people astray and stuff fits right in there perfectly.
Yeah, I don't.
And again ties into stories of little people too. Not that and I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that little people are actually taking or hurting these people. I just think that legend has arisen from the same source of whatever is happening here, and that's why we see connections.
Yeah, and I can't tell you the number of emails I've had from people that have said that they've seen strange lights in the woods. I mean, it's just hundreds of emails like that.
Hmm. And for him, again, why would he take off his boots?
I mean, if the kid was so tired that he couldn't walk, why would you take off your boots?
And then walk.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he was completely delirious. Or like the kid we talked about before, maybe he was being affected by something that was disorienting him to such a degree that he didn't know what he was doing.
Well, again, and people, some real acute people that are thinking way ahead of the game, I'm thinking along this way all the time, is I was looking in these reports for any mention of the bottom of James McCormick Jr.'s feet.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's found and his feet are completely clean, well, he didn't walk anywhere.
Now, what is the most number of people you've ever seen taken at one point?
I think, well, it really wasn't at one point, but there's a case I write about in the books where there were 4 hunters in northern Colorado, kind of north of Steamboat Springs in the Route Canyon area. And I think 2 disappeared, 1 came back. 2 go out, 1 comes back, 1 goes out and never comes back, and that leaves 1. And he went to go get help, and nobody was ever found.
Yeah. So it's kind of like they disappeared individually, though.
Yeah, it wasn't one mass disappearance.
Because it seems like, if I'm remembering right in all these books, I think like 2 is probably the highest number of people disappearing in groups.
I think you're right.
And but 99% of them is one person, singled out in some way.
And many times they're found under circumstances where if you didn't know the bigger picture, you could easily kind of just analyze it away as an accident or unfortunate circumstance. But if you look at it, again, from 30,000 feet, and you notice everything that's happening around them, or you notice all the associated factors, you go, wow, yeah, there's more here.
What I keep looking at, and it doesn't explain it, is that part of it could be something environmental. And what I mean by that is you have certain rock types, you have water in the area. There could be something cosmic hitting the area at that point, whether it be electromagnetic field or burst from somewhere in the cosmos that is setting something off that affects only certain people. But that doesn't explain all the variables. It might also explain why bad weather follows it. If something like that happens, some kind of electrical activity could stir up the weather, create the bad weather, but that doesn't explain how someone's belt gets rolled up and put next to a skull.
Correct.
And it doesn't explain how people get singled out. If that were the sole thing happening, it seems like you would see someone suddenly get dazed, confused, wander off. These people don't disappear within sight of other people.
No, and that's part of the sort of the conundrum of it all.
I mean, have you ever heard of a case where somebody saw someone acting weird right before they disappeared?
Well, other than not feeling well,
right?
That's probably the most common one.
And there's no specific not feeling well. It's just kind of I don't feel that good type of thing, right?
Right.
You talk a little bit about the Great Lakes Triangle, and there's a lot of disappearances around the Great Lakes.
In fact, I've told people to read a book called The Great Lakes Triangle. It's fantastic. It's old. I think it's in the late 60s, early 70s it was written, but there's still copies out there, and you can get them real cheap. And they talk about airplanes, boats, ships, people that have all disappeared and never been found out there. And I read that book probably at about the time I was working cases in that Great Lakes area, and The interesting thing to me is that a lot of those disappearances happened suddenly. People were never found, ships never found, planes never found. In fact, there's some military planes that went into that area over suspicious circumstances and never came out. So there's a lot going on in the Great Lakes. And when you look at the cluster map, I have clusters of disappearances all the way surrounding the Great Lakes. And when we talk about water proximity, that's one of the best cases ever.
Now, a debunker to all this might say that, well, sure, people can drown easier in the water and disappear easier into the water, and that might explain some of these things.
Absolutely could. The unusual part of that, though, is that many of the disappearances in that area around there they weren't close to the water, meaning they were 10, 15 miles away. There's 2 clusters of hunters that disappeared, and the clusters are almost right next to each other. And in one instance, I think there were 3 or 4 hunters that disappeared on the same day and were never found. So I think on the face, it goes back to people that just listen to a few videos and don't read the facts and come to these rapid associations and say, oh, let's think of something easy to explain it away. But in reality, when you look at the facts, they're not so easily explained away.
No, there's always that missing piece.
Correct.
There's always that piece, like, it could be this, except for this little part here.
Yeah.
And animal attacks, I mean, that's one people bring up all the time, but animal attacks are fairly obvious. You had a case in here somewhere where it looked like there was a struggle. The snow was all beaten down. It was an older case, but the guy was laying there dead with absolutely no damage to him.
Well, I was bringing up a fact that people always want to ignore, and they go, well, it was probably a mountain lion. Well, does anybody know in the last 110 years how many fatal mountain lion attacks there have been in North America?
No idea.
16. And you could go onto Wikipedia and look for yourself, but I think that's the number 16 or 17, or 15. I'm not even sure, but the number's so extremely low, it's ridiculous.
And what about bears? Bears aren't generally prone to attack people, correct?
Well, black bears don't normally attack people, no, and that's where, that's 95% of the area in the U.S. There's only a very small area where there's grizzly bears up in Idaho, Montana, and maybe just a sliver of Wyoming, but that's about it. So you can't blame bears for this, because, again, if a bear attacks you, what are you going to do? You're going to fight for your life. And normally black bears don't kill people, and you're going to scream, you're going to help. People are going to hear this. There's going to be a scene there. There's going to be blood. There's going to be hair. When trackers come in, they're going to see this. And bears don't consume the whole body, so you're going to find the body.
And because these guys are hunters too, it's far less likely that an animal is going to get the drop on them, and they have a weapon.
Yeah, you'd think so. I mean, there's a couple cases I write about in the books where the sheriff made some association when they found the hunter and his gun was broken in half, and he thought that the sheriff thought that it was some mighty fight with a bear. And I don't know. I mean, it's possible, but I don't know.
Yeah, that was a weird one, because there was blood and it looked like there was some kind of fight. But I mean, to break a gun apart, as you put it, I mean, it again didn't quite make sense.
No.
So let's talk about Rhonda Cardinal.
Well, Rhonda's case has shed some light on this topic that may be important, and happened July 31st, 2012 in a place called Calling Lake, Alberta, Canada. It's about 100 miles north of Edmonton. And she was 42 years old. She was at a hunting cabin, and she was staying there for a week, 10 days, and a relative went up there, found she was gone, and reported her missing. Well, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police searched for her for 8 days with helicopters, ground searchers, ATVs. They flew it every day. And this was a rough area, swampy, thick. And they were befuddled. They didn't know what to think. but they terminated the effort when they found no evidence at all where she might be. And the biggest thing is they couldn't explain why she would have left the cabin in the first place without notifying somebody or explaining what happened or calling a friend or whatever. But her explanation when they eventually found her, she stated that when she was in the cabin, she must have blacked out. And she woke up in the woods, lost and wandering in the bush. She states that after a few days, she ditched her shoes and took off her T-shirt and wrapped them over her feet. Then she says she ate berries and drank water to survive. She eventually broke into another isolated hunting cabin and found food to survive. She was found on a road by someone driving by who stopped to assist her. And the RCMP estimated that she had to have traveled over 22 kilometers from point to point. Now, the reason I put this in here is that what caused her to black out?
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a statement of blacking out, and there's another statement of missing time. And I'm not sure what Rhonda really meant. And if there's a loss of memory, well, she can't account for that time then. So is it just semantics that we're talking about?
Right.
And where had she gone during that time, and what had she done?
And why take the shoes off and wrap her feet with her shirt?
Yeah, it's contrary to logic.
I mean, unless the shoes were really hurting her for some reason.
Another person who already read that said, well, maybe she just said that, but maybe there's something else there that she just doesn't want to admit to. I have no idea.
Maybe.
You know, maybe she has some slight memory of something else that she doesn't want to address.
Or maybe she doesn't even fully remember. She's just guessing that that's why that's what she did.
Exactly. I think that's probably pretty logical.
I mean, it's one of the few cases where someone is found alive, but it doesn't give us answers. It gives us more puzzle pieces, if anything.
And I don't know. I think that's an intriguing one, just because she's found alive and she's willing to say that, yeah, I don't have any memory of this.
Yeah. Well, you state throughout the books a lot of the people who are found alive, the ones who are able to communicate that aren't, too young or have too many mental issues. They seem to have a very hazy recollection of what happened to them.
Yep. Sometimes they don't remember anything. They don't remember why they got lost, where they've been, or how they were found.
And to me, that suggests the possibility of an altered state of consciousness, that you're just not remembering when you return to a normal state of consciousness. But what sets that state of consciousness off, who knows?
Yeah.
You know, is it something that specifically targets these people? Or is it something that just happens and allows them into a different state of mind?
Well, you know what I was thinking about when I finished the book. I was sitting in my house by myself, and I was flipping through the channels, and I just happened to hit on one of these hunting shows. And I was watching these guys sitting in the blind day after day, and I'm thinking, how many tens of thousands of hunters there must be out there that must have seen something or must have experienced something, but because it's a hunting environment, machoism and things, they never want to discuss it.
True, very true. And there's a lot of weird things that people just don't want to talk about, hunter or not.
Oh,
they don't want to be laughed at.
Oh, yes.
Do you still get people telling you it's Bigfoot?
Again, it's only the people that haven't read the books. and it's so, oh, I know what you meant. It was Bigfoot. it's insane. I mean, there's some people that make posts and say, oh, I said it was Bigfoot. I've never said that. And, I mean, some people just completely fabricate. I mean, what can I say?
You've always been very careful from the time you published the first book on to not really pin anything on it because you can't prove any of it. Do you feel you understand this stuff better, or do you just have more questions as you go on?
Sometimes I think the more I know, the less I really know. And then other times I think, well, there's people that are giving us little pieces to the puzzle, and we need to focus on those, like this woman who doesn't have any memory, and she was in a cabin, then she was out. Well, there's other stories I've written about where kids, very small kids, were in a house with their aunt. She falls asleep. There's an alarm on the house. She wakes up. The dog's gone. The kid's gone, but the alarm is still on. How did the kid get out?
Yeah. And you look to Whitley Strieber and his incursion into his house where they put the implant in his ear and they never set off the alarm.
Yeah.
I mean, not to say that's the same thing, but it's just the first thing that comes to mind with an alarm that didn't get set off that should have.
And it's those kind of facts that people don't want to acknowledge. And when they hear about that, they think, oh, you know what, that's just an anomaly. That didn't, and they shuck it off because it represents too much. It's obviously not a human that's involved here. If they can defeat the alarm, get inside your house, and take you out without it ever going off.
Or if it is a human, it's someone with technology way beyond what we know about.
Oh, that's for sure.
I mean, we know the government has black projects. I mean, you were talking earlier about potential of weather modification. I mean, we know we have ways of modifying the weather, but if these black projects are a decade, 2 decades ahead of what we know exists, and our technology's advancing at the speed that it is, we have no idea what might actually be out there.
Well, there's a book called Cameleo. Have you heard of it?
I don't think so.
It's only been out about 3 or 4 months, and what it is, it's a story about a young kid kind of thing north of San Diego that is harassed incessantly by a group of people that have stealth technology and actually can become invisible. And he implicates the Department of the Navy. And this guy, real credible guy, wrote a great book about the incident and the technology and how it appeared that they were just testing it on this kid that was using drugs because they probably thought nobody would give a damn and never give the kid an ounce of credibility as to what he claimed. And it's a really intriguing story. Knapp had the guy on his show, and he called me later and says, you got to read this book. And I said, all right. And it was a good one. It's a good one.
Can you spell that?
Oh, I figured you'd ask me that. Okay, it's C-H-A-M, like Mary, E-L-E-O, C-H-A-M-E-L-E-O. The guy's name is Robert Guffey, G-U-F-F-E-Y.
Huh. And I've heard things like that before, that the government is testing out different kinds of mind control on random people. And it's one of those things you can't prove or disprove.
I know one thing. I don't want to be one of their victims.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, we know from history, things like MK Ultra and other projects, that they're not above doing something like this.
It's a scary thing. I don't even want to think about. I mean, you got to hope that you got to hope it's our government. We're using it for good things and not testing it on our own people. Except our government has proven that they will test it on us.
Yes. Yeah. The other thing about the Rhonda Cardinal case is it does bear some resemblance to the mysterious non-drownings of your last book.
It's true.
It's that blacking out. You had a few cases, if I remember, where people blacked out and didn't know where they were or what they were doing.
That's true.
Now you, in covering those cases, I know recently there's been a bunch of articles about a particular drug that people are using on the street to kidnap people.
Well, I've talked about it in Missing 411, a sobering coincidence, that some really, really advanced medical examiners did some things that weren't normally done, and they tested for GHB, and they found it in some of these dead boys that were found in the water. And how it got into them, nobody knows. Why it was given to them, well, it kind of makes you're awake, you know what's happening, but you really can't move much. And, you know, if you were given that and then dropped in the water, you would die of a drowning. It'd be a horrific death. And in the end, if they hadn't tested for the GHB, it would be just listed as a common drowning. And this is what I write about in the books, and nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to address it. And the unusual nature of these disappearances, it's beyond weird.
There was a listener who had sent me something very interesting, and he said, just a quick observation I've made in regards to the presence of GHB being found in these individuals. Looking on the wiki page for GHB, it states GHB has neuroprotective properties and is found to protect cells from hypoxia, and that generalized hypoxia occurs in healthy people when they ascend to high altitude, where it causes altitude sickness, leading to potentially fatal complications. High-altitude pulmonary edema and high-altitude cerebral edema are the two main complications. Now, in the last book, you talk a couple of times where it almost seems like someone's just snatched up.
Yep.
And in these cases, the fact that these people just suddenly disappear.
Correct.
It's really unfortunate no one has ever tested one of these found wilderness disappearances for GHB. I mean, they wouldn't think to. I mean, why would they?
Well, you know, when they go through a common autopsy, there's a screen they do for, you know, coke, crank, meth, all this stuff. But GHB is one of them that they don't test for. And I know that there's a couple medical examiners that I talk to regularly, and they're probably going to write a white paper about these deaths and the need to open up the screening to GHB. And once I think that you educate the masses and they need to know that, hey, this is something that's becoming more common and we need to screen for it, I think it'll probably happen. But, you know, it's like everything. It's nickels and dimes. And can they afford to spend another $10 or $15 per body on a GHB screen? I don't know.
But it is interesting. If it does do that, if someone ascends to a height quickly and it has GHB into it, you know, and it can create GHB in a system. Well, unless, okay, I see what he's saying. I was thinking that the body creates it, but he's saying that it protects the person.
Well, actually, our body does produce GHB in very low volumes, not
Really?
enough to hurt us. Right. And I write about that in the book, and I explain it.
Okay, I didn't remember that part.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting connection, because I do remember you talking about the possibility of people being snatched upwards suddenly. Also, it struck me at one point that if someone is encountering some kind of portal, I mean, not that we know whether or not portals exist or not, but any kind of like change could create hypothermia-like effects on the person. That maybe the weather's not causing that to happen, but their sudden removal of clothes could become from a sudden temperature change caused by something else.
Well, I think it was Missing 411 North America and Beyond. I wrote about that in a handful of cases, the kids, when they were found, were immediately taken to a hospital. And on a whole series of those, doctors indicated that the kids had a low-grade fever. And the vast majority of times, the victim is either deceased or they can't get to medical care quickly. But in those instances, they did. And I wrote in there that it seemed to be unusual that it was just a low-grade temperature and the doctors didn't align it with any medical issue.
Yeah, I remember that. The other note I had made here, we talk about people being found where they were previously searched. This is something you see also in poltergeist cases where objects will disappear and someone will be looking all over the house for them and they'll come back and they'll be right where they're supposed to be.
Right.
How that would connect in, I don't know, but it was in talking to people about poltergeist cases that just stuck out to me that, oh, they found it where they had previously searched for it. And it's like, right, where does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
And wherever these things are going, and that's the other thing, stuff that's apported in poltergeist cases is often warm. Like if rocks suddenly form and start falling in someone's house or something, they're usually hot to the touch.
Huh.
So if something like this happens to a person, they may suddenly get very, very hot.
Yeah.
Whether that has anything to do with what's actually going on, it's just, little pieces my brain put together that may or may not have any basis in reality.
Huh. That's good.
I mean, we know what's happening in the poltergeist cases to an extent. We know they're being created by people unconsciously. Like I said, it doesn't explain the missing 411 stuff because I doubt people are unconsciously causing themselves to go missing.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
But whatever mechanism creates that can move things around in poltergeist cases could potentially be responsible for some of these missing people.
Yeah. Interesting.
But in the end, we don't have an answer.
No, we don't.
And I know there are people out there who think you know what's going on and you just don't want to tell us.
It's hilarious. I mean, if it was so easy and all the information's out there, somebody tell us.
So the book is available now. The only place people can get it, well, it's not the only place. The only place they should get it is the canammissing.com site.
Yeah, if they only want to pay retail, so as long as they don't want to spend, $75 to $125.
Yeah, so avoid Amazon for this book.
Amazon, eBay, any of those sites, don't go to them.
You do have it available in a box set with how many books?
6 books.
Okay. The map is available as well if someone wants to get an outlay. How many cases are actually on the map? Roughly?
I would say at least 1,500.
Wow. And that's only the ones you found.
Right.
And the documentary will be out eventually.
End of this year, early next year. It's done. It's at the film festivals right now.
Okay. And you have a YouTube, too, that's linked off of the Can-Am Missing, right?
Yep. You can go to the Can-Am Missing website, canammissing.com, and you can find all kinds of links that give you more information. There's a current events page that has right up to date with cases that we're looking at that are unusual.
Okay. Anything sticking out to you at the moment?
There's been a giant surge in missing cases in the last 3 weeks. I think probably there's 10 or 12 of them right now.
Really? In one area or across the U.S.?
All over.
And if people have a case, do you want them sending them to you?
Only if it matches the profile of what we're looking for, and if it matches that, for sure, send them to it at missing411@yahoo.com.
So you don't, and that's something I think people need to understand. There is a criteria you're looking for. It's not just missing people. It's not just strange disappearances. It's the stuff we've talked about over the last 2 hours. It's very specific points.
That's it. Yes, sir.
And I feel like since I've been talking to you about this stuff over the last few years, if I see a missing persons case, when those points are there, they stick out like a sore thumb. They really do.
Yeah, I think it. I mean, I've got, I think, 4,700 friends on Facebook, and they're always sending me things that a lot of times I've never heard of, but are right on the money. Yeah, you're right.
How many new cases do you end up seeing every week?
Well, people probably throw at least 5 cases at me every week, and out of those 5, I'd say maybe 1 out of every 2 weeks, one of them is valid.
Do you update anywhere if any of these cases do get solved?
Oh, yeah, and some of the cases in this book, I updated them from previous books.
Okay. But, like, have any of the cases had more mundane explanations? People have been found, and they say, oh, well, we know exactly what happened to them now.
Not really, no.
Okay. All right. Any appearances or anything coming up? People where you're going to be speaking or anything?
I'm going to be at the Philadelphia MUFON conference later this year. So if you just go Google MUFON Philadelphia conference, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be in Chicago at a Spook Fest. They're going to have me speak there. I'm going to be in Albuquerque in a couple weeks, and then I'm going to be in Phoenix, Arizona at the Phoenix MUFON in third week of September.
Nice. All right. And again, everything related to this can be found at canammissing.com.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much, David.
Hey, Soraya, it's always a pleasure, and I appreciate the time.
You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.